Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Vanessa. How are you? How was vacation?
It was great, thanks.
Tough to be back?
A little bit, yeah. Tom did a big upgrade on my computer this morning, so the screen looks a little different on my end, but can you see me okay?
I can. Hold on 2 seconds. Let me just go back in. I got out to put my volume on. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Palmer.
Evening, how are you?
That's a mighty big cup of Joe you got there.
Well, the cup's bigger than the Joe.
Okay, well, that's good then. I was going to say, I hope it's not going to be that long of a meeting tonight.
Oh, you never know. We can talk up a storm.
Oh, we can. We certainly can.
Besides, it seems like every time I try and log into a meeting, something goes wrong. I don't know what it is. Like this time, all of a sudden, my computer dropped the router off.
Oh, geez.
Since I got the new computer, there are a few glitches. So it's just weird. Very odd.
Well, we're glad you could make it. I think Planning Board had issues. They just went live.
Ooh.
So.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
They had to send it on Zoom on the town website. They had to put a new link and everything in at 7:10.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that would make me panic.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but they are live now. So I just checked. So Andrew, is that your house or is that your barn?
This is the barn.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's connected to the house.
Right, but I thought it was the barn. Somebody said something to me after the last meeting. They said, oh, no, that's got to be his house. And I said, no, I've heard about this amazing barn. I will guarantee you it's probably the barn.
Yes.
So, yes.
The barn is technically part of the house.
Once COVID's over, we're going to wire Andrew's house, or the barn, I should say, and we're going to do our meetings from there because it looks like a very calming and happy place.
It does.
It's already set up. I got a 10-foot screen up there and more TVs. It's good to go.
There we go. We are good to go. You know what? It looks comfy. Lots of places to sit. We could social distance just fine.
Yeah.
Watch the game while we have a meeting.
Oh, the best. Yeah. Yeah.
Monday night football meetings.
If you hear yelling in the background, I'm going to try to mute as much as I can. My son's home from college watching football, so we'll see. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
We should get the same music from Monday Night Football to start off our meetings. Get us all revved up.
Well, at least we got done with the bee sting thing here at my house, so we are good now.
Yeah.
So,
what was up with that?
So I had said to my poor husband, just back from vacation, I said, hey, you know what? You need to cut this vine thing. It's crawling up the side of the house. He goes like in this tree, and there must have been like a yellow jacket's nest. He suddenly comes running out, and they are like all over him. He got stung so many times. So his eyes swelled up, and his hands and feet were tingling. I'm like, oh my God, take a Benadryl. Let's see if this works. So fingers crossed it did. It took a while. I wasn't sure if we were going to have to call the ambulance for him. So thankfully we didn't. So I think it was just he got bit so many times that
That's scary.
It is scary because he's never had a reaction like that before. So, but he's like, my hands kind of tingle and my feet are kind of burning. I'm like, well, that's not normal. That's not a good thing. Not a good thing. So thankfully after 2 Benadryl, he's sleeping now. So he'll be good. So Vanessa, when did you get back from Nantucket?
Saturday night.
Saturday night. Okay.
Yeah. The weather was really nice down there, though, so hard to leave.
Yeah. Well, we're supposed to get some nice weather this week, though, I think.
I know.
But much better temperatures.
I know. It was actually kind of cool. Mark and I sat outside for a while to go over a few things today, and it was a little cool out there, but I suppose it is mid-September.
It is. It is. Not a bad thing, no. Not a bad thing. I don't know. So, Joe, what are you thinking about trick-or-treating for the kids? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure how to answer that, depending on what kind of answer you're looking for.
Well, people are debating on it now, whether there should be trick-or-treating because of COVID or there shouldn't be, or, so I'm just curious, seeing as you have kids, so just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
Well, we usually pal up and go in a pack with the next 4 neighbors.
Yep.
So, and go as a troop. My guess is that we'll probably do it. I think the more unstable part of that mission is how many houses want to receive visitors,
Yeah.
as opposed to how many kids want to be out running around.
Yep.
So, I mean, and let's face it, you know, if I'm a house that doesn't even really want kids, all you have to do is put a bowl of candy out on the doorstep, and that
Yep.
sort of solves the issue without, you know, sort of ruining it for the kids. And since we're always out, we always leave a bowl outside. So I sort of hope that's the way it goes, and that, you know, so the people that are out wanting to do it can do it, and the people that are in their houses can still feel safe, and yet the whole experience doesn't change so much that the kids all miss out, which is.
I know. I'm just curious.
Not that I really want my kids to have all the candy. You end up throwing half of it out because you don't want to give them all the sugar anyway.
Yeah.
It's off the walls.
Yep.
But
all right, well, that's interesting.
I bet you miss those days.
I do. We used to actually, because there's not a whole lot of houses that trick-or-treat in our neighborhood. So just down the street from us, it's a big, like a U-shaped cul-de-sac, and it's probably got 50 or 60 houses. So we used to decorate the golf cart. I used to drive and sit in the golf cart, and Robert, I'd drop him off at each house, and he would go, and yeah.
Yeah.
So I do miss that, though. I do.
Well, you can always keep it up. Actually,
I can still just drive around decorated with the golf cart.
You should actually. One of the neighbors here in Parkerville sets up every year with a different theme, and he'll have like a movie screen on the garage, and he'll have the mannequins out doing all sorts of stuff. And,
love it.
And I don't, you know, it's pretty obvious they haven't seen kids and, you know, their own kids in 15, 20. So it's kind of interesting, but it's really nice, and you know, people stop, and we always go over, and so there's plenty of crowd.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I just don't know what he's going to do this year. They may decide not to.
I know, it's so tough. So tough.
It's hard when you want to put those up, but part of the experience is that you want to be with everybody. And I mean, they're older, so
yep.
I don't know if they're going to set up not being able to be with the crowd.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. I know some towns are calling it already, but I'm like, I don't know.
Depending on how it's organized, you really don't have to. I mean,
exactly.
Obviously, we live in a town where the population density is pretty light, so you're not likely. I mean, the likelihood of us even running into other kids, you know, sort of just casually is actually fairly minimal. And if everybody was traveling the same way, we never would. So
right.
It's rather interesting. But yeah, there's plenty of room on the streets here. I mean, why not? I mean, put the candy outdoors. You know, people can watch you through the windows if they like to watch the carnival. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So.
Yep. Good evening, Mr. Hark.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. You guys are talking about Halloween?
We are.
I haven't even thought about that yet. Trying to avoid the discussion in my house.
Yeah. I've had a few calls. People are asking, so I'm just kind of curious to what everybody kind of thinks and what they might like to see happen.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to dress as an outlaw.
There you go. Exactly.
Wrap on the bandana and go.
There you go. I think Jason should just buy like a ton of candy and we can all go there.
That wouldn't be a good idea for a lot of reasons.
Jason, I am having a glitch with getting onto the YouTube channel, so I'm trying to reach Tom right now.
Okay, I can hold up. I mean, we don't have full crew yet anyways, but I can hold off calling us to order for a few minutes.
Okay.
If
do you want me to make you the host or anything?
You can make me co-host.
Okay.
That way, if you need to do anything.
Our MC.
Vanessa, it says up in the corner it's recording.
That's through Zoom, but not through YouTube.
Gotcha.
So that's always a backup, and Tom can always use that link to upload, but I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong. I'm just going to try and reach him on the phone.
Good evening, Kathy.
Hey, Lisa.
Jeff, I'm listed to write meetings on this one, aren't I?
Yes, that's okay. Does that still work?
Yeah, no, whatever you need.
Thanks.
I know Vanessa's on mute, but I think Kathy went on. They're having issues with the YouTube channel, so we're just going to give her a few minutes to see if she can figure that out before we start.
Jason, we're having a glitch with YouTube tonight, but Tom can take the link from Zoom and upload that through YouTube. But anyone watching so you can't watch live through YouTube tonight, but you can come in to the meeting through Zoom.
Okay, so is he going to post something on the town website about that?
I'm going to ask him to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So then, are we good to get going then? And then,
yep, you are recording through Zoom as of now.
okay.
Just not you.
And then there will be a recording on the back end that will be uploaded to YouTube.
It will be. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Is everyone else ready to go then?
Yep.
All right. I will call the Southborough Capital Planning Committee meeting to order Monday, September 14th, 2020, 7:32 p.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information in the general guidelines for remote participation by the members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. With that, I will move to approval of meeting minutes from August 10th, 2020. So Jeff had circulated a version that included the edits that were proposed by a few members at the August 31st. Sorry. We approved August 10th on Friday. We now have August 31st and September 11th to approve tonight. So Andrew had circulated these to the committee. Were there any questions or comments? Andrew, I just had one thing. It's pretty minor, but open for the committee for discussion, but just under approval meeting minutes, it says, therefore, the decision was made to postpone the approval of the minutes, make the edits offline, and bring updated minutes to the next meeting for approval. I just think it's important we note that only one person was delegated that task, so Jeff took the feedback, just so that no one questions that there was multiple versions offline. So I would just say Mr. Hark make the edits offline. If the committee is okay with that.
Sure.
I'd prefer to word it that way. Any other questions, comments?
So what, just take out you out of that?
No.
I would just add,
Mr.
where it says, was made to postpone the approval of the meeting minutes, and Mr. Hark will make the edits offline and bring updated minutes to the next meeting for approval.
Okay.
So I will move that we accept with that one item. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Seconded by Jeff. Any further discussion? Roll call. BRACCIO.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski. Aye. Then going to September 11. These were circulated by Jeff and included in the packet. Just scrolling here. I had two items that I'll raise quickly. Mr. Purple can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he was at the meeting. He's listed as absent. I don't know, Mark, if you remember. Were you there Friday morning?
Yes, I was there Friday morning.
All right,
Okay.
I apologize. I'll fix that.
It's okay.
And then the only other thing that I'd raise to the committee, because it was referenced, is under the ClearGov capital planning module, whether I think it's important to note that we started at a quote of over $5,800 before getting down to the $2,375. So I just thought it was important to note that we didn't just accept the number at face value.
All right, so I'll update. The price has been negotiated down to $2,375, down from $5,800.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Are there any other comments?
Yes, under the section for the appraisal, South Union, it's a 4 sentence down. We should call him appraiser and not assessor. The next time down, you do call him an appraiser, but on that one you say assessor.
All right, I'll change all references to from
You see what I'm
assessor to
talking
appraiser.
about?
Yeah.
Because Sabelli is the assessor. We don't want to mix up the two.
Got it.
Yeah, the third party is the appraiser. Mr. Sabelli is the assessor.
Got it.
All right. Absent those edits, are there any other comments? Then I will move with those edits. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jeff. Any further conversation? All right, roll call. BRACCIO.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
Malinowski. Aye. So those carry unanimously. Next item is chairman's update. So included on our share drive was a link to the full engineering report that's been received by the third-party consultant. Included in it has a probable estimate of what the work will undertake, and obviously some very clear images of what the deficiencies are in the building. We will talk about phasing for that in the updates to the capital plan under item 4. But I think the important thing to note is Mr. Parent, the facilities director, has already drafted the CPC application for this project. It's planning to go in with both the windows and the exterior all together as one project to get the scale for the town. As late as this afternoon, I reached out to CPC. They are, Ms. Gillespie, who works for the CPC, did denote that they're working on some minor revisions to the application and are going to be opening their application period soon. I did not hear back from Andrew, the chair, in terms of when that application will be due, but I would say if the application period closed tomorrow, Mr. Parent's in a good position to submit it, which I think is great. Kudos to him for really shepherding that process start to finish and really finding the right people and coming up with that pretty comprehensive report. I think it's now just a matter of how the project is presented. I also have reached out to the chair of the Historic Commission, given the historic nature of the building and the likely preservation restriction that would be required to undertake this work using CPA funds, just to see if they want to weigh in on any of it, in terms of more level of support for a project of that, given that we would be going under the historic preservation. So that's all in motion. The Board of Selectmen did also vote to support, submitting an application, and they also voted to support a preservation restriction if one was required, which Mr. Mills was very clear from the get-go. If you're going to use historic preservation money from CPA, you would be looking to preserve the actual building, which, given the nature of the building, I don't think we've ever heard any sort of objections to such a thing like we have with maybe other buildings in town that have come up recently. Any questions on that?
Jason, what was the estimate for the roof and the exterior?
It's 2.2 million all in. Of that is about 400K related to the windows themselves. If for some reason we have to separate the projects and do the windows under general fund and the rest of the project under CPA, there is engineering's kind of bundled in there right now. So we probably have to bid it separately. Also, due to the size, and we'll talk about this a little later, is there's also owner's project manager fees in there, because any project over 1.5 million in town, in the state, it's a state law, requires an owner's project manager. So that's already in the probable estimate.
Yeah, so it's the same as what we had in the capital plan.
Not quite. The windows were in the capital plan for 600K, and the exterior was in there for 500K. So it's significantly more, but no one had ever actually done work. The 500 on the exterior was literally Mr. Parent putting his finger in air and guessing based on what he saw, but it's more now what we couldn't see that you can tell. And I think I'll forward the application once Mr. Parent makes whatever edits he was going to make, just so everyone can see it. But I think one of the things that I didn't realize was that building really has never had any sort of capital improvements since it was built. So,
minor things.
Yeah, nothing of this nature, I guess. No additions, anything like that. Just really ADA compliance items, was my understanding.
So why would we have to separate the project just because it gets funded from two different places?
The only reason we would have to separate it is if the CPC does not agree that the windows are historic preservation.
I understand that, but why would you have to separate the project?
You wouldn't.
Engineer, et cetera. I thought that's what you said a minute ago. You might have to separate the project.
You go out with one bid, two different funding sources. So it'd be very similar to what we did with the public safety building.
All right.
We went out with one bid, three funding sources, essentially.
That makes sense. That's not what I thought you said, but good.
Anything else on that?
Yeah, I do have a question. Sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I didn't see any type of delineation here in terms of cost to remove the asbestos. Do you know, I don't know the answer to this, but is that potentially covered by insurance or some other type of funds?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'll ask John to circulate something on that.
Okay.
Does the asbestos have anything to do with the heating or HVAC? Do you know?
I think it's around the windows.
Windows.
Yeah.
The windows, I think, have been at least up for consideration in the last 5 fiscal years. And
At least.
I know we're quickly the first thing that have been pushed off when we've run into other budgetary issues.
So the asbestos removal is part of the cost, correct?
At least based on what they see, yes. This is kind of your all-in of, I mean, as we all know from public bidding, right? Sometimes the bids come back way higher than what the consultant has told us. Sometimes they come back way lower. So we're not going to know a final number until we go to bid, but I know CPC usually puts up to a 30% contingency on a lot of their projects. Obviously, that would be a discussion they would have given the magnitude of this one.
Oh, that probably leads into one of my questions, which was, is the 15% contingency on here fairly standard for this?
The advice we got when we were building the public safety building, which again was new, was 10%, but we were told somewhere between 15 and 20% if we had actually renovated the old police and fire station, which had similar issues, asbestos, something underneath the old high school was buried under the fire station. So similar sort of environmental issues.
Yeah. My other question was, does anybody know, I mean, there's a listing in here at the bottom for about $250,000 in engineering expenses. And from the look of what they're talking about doing, I was wondering the nature of the $250,000 quote for engineering expenses, what that was actually for and what was going to.
Typically it would be at least for the as-built drawings, right? So they have to develop a bid set that goes out to the public bid, which basically delineates the entire scope of work. And then on the back end, they have to do as-built drawings. I can inquire whether there's anything more than that, but that's typically what I've seen.
Yeah, it just seemed that part might be a little high based on.
It does to me too, Joe. So I agree with you. But to go back to Joe's previous question or statement, in the for-profit world, you never see a contingency of 15% or 20% in a building.
Right.
5. So we're in the not-for-profit world.
I think the other thing to remember is it's oversight of some of these projects too, right? Is we only have so much control over bid conditions, but it's also how do you avoid spending contingency, and have you vetted all possible avenues for items? Just because you have a contingency budget doesn't mean you spend it, sort of thing.
I was just also concerned about how, I mean, that sort of total of $500,000 there at the end might affect the way that we bond it, or the amount of money that comes from different sources and how that might be affected.
Yeah, the way they have to bid it is we would have to call out, like, add alternates. We'd have to kind of phase it and have them bid it that way. And then you'd have to probably split time if, the owner's project. I mean, hopefully we don't get to that. Is kind of my goal. So, well, I would say let's cross that road when we get there. But I'm hoping we don't get there based on how they've drawn this up. Anything else in Townhouse? I think you're just going to continue to get updates on this one until the CPC takes action on it, because ultimately it'd be their job to bring it to town meeting floor. Obviously, we're happy to work through a presentation with them and sponsor it with John and Mark, etc.
Jason, do you know what the balances are for CPA funds? Does anybody know?
I saw in Brian's presentation to the BOS that he didn't actually make was about $2 million, but it grows every day, every time they cut.
But remember, it's that there's 4 buckets. So what's in the historic bucket is what we care about. Plus, they're going to bond it anyway, Andrew. So we don't have to have all the money in there right now. Plus, remember last year, nothing got spent because that article never came to town meeting. We only did we didn't do it, and we didn't have the fall. So nothing got spent with what got added to it last year. So they should be pretty flush.
Yeah. Just curious what the dollars were.
And you'll see in the capital plan that we'll talk through in item 4, right? Brian's done an estimated bonding schedule to make sure that we keep the funds in check if it did go through.
Gotcha. Okay.
Just a question, because I'm the newbie here. Say we bond this project, it comes in below bids and estimates. Where does that money, the rest of the money from allocation from the bond fall, if we had left over?
So we typically temporary. Remember, but we also temporarily bond these things though first, right?
Sure.
Like, so we don't go out and get a full bond until we know the project cost. So for example, on the public safety building, we turned back over $3 million.
Yes.
Brian didn't bond what town meeting authorized. He bonded what we actually spent. But they go out and get temporary notes from time to time over the course of the project so they can pay the bills on interest only. And then they make a decision based on economic conditions of when to permanently bond.
Thanks.
Brian, anything you want to add on that? I think it's a good question, Joe.
No, good question, and you're accurate.
Okay. It's helpful to actually have experience in saving some money, right? All right, so let's go to BOS meeting 8/18 of 20. We've had 2 meetings since then, but as you know, there was a broad capital plan update that I gave to the BOS during that meeting. I think the only thing that everyone's likely aware of at this point is obviously there is no fall town meeting. So the next action will be the spring 2021 town meeting. And we already had a pretty full house capital-wise for the spring. But we obviously have 3 items that are going to be carried over now that we had at least proposed be considered. So that'll be something we'll work through, and we'll talk through the timing of when we want to kind of land on our final capital for FY22. But the general consensus we made with BOS is that capital should hopefully be locked and loaded in terms of a final plan that most people can vet both BOS and advisory and vote on, late fall here. So that then we know what the number is moving into kind of review of operational budgets, as opposed to, I think in the past we've done it together. Capital is easy to chop pretty, and it'll really focus where the town needs to go from an operational perspective. Obviously, if the economic conditions change, receipts go down or something along those lines, we can always revisit it up until town meeting. But I think we want to get in front of it and say, these are the true needs. These are the ones we think fit in a normal budget year, and then adjust from there. And also, as we work through it, consider how we prioritize, right? If there is going to have to be something that falls, right? Where do some of these items fall based on ability to bond, total cost, and overall need? Any questions on that? Item 3C, South Union, the appraisal proposal was signed on Friday by Mark. So I've asked for a timeline of when we're going to see that. I'll have to work with BOS of how they want to handle that once the data is received, because then I think that will start going into strategy and decision-making of how the town wants to proceed there. So I'll keep everyone updated as data becomes available, but probably won't hear a lot on that for a couple of weeks at least. The other thing just to highlight is I feel like I've now made the rounds to all pertinent committees. So I participated in Youth Commission meeting, Recreation, SHOPSy, about this topic, given that they're either the main users or have a potential use of that building. And nothing I'd say that I've learned in those meetings is different than what we already knew in terms of obviously making sure we have the right temporary space if there is going to, and obviously work through permanent space needs as well at the same time. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to go to item 4, updates to capital plans since last meeting. So I'm going to, does everyone have the reconciliation?
Yeah.
Can anyone hear my background noise, or are you good? I have one defiant child that won't go to bed.
That's all right.
I'll let those that know my kids guess which one it is. I'm just going to go down the list, and if anyone, I'll explain why the change came about, and then we will go from there. Obviously, pause me. So I'm going to start with line 96, DPW new office floor coverings. So this was one, last meeting, everyone kind of said they wanted to hear more about it from Karen, both this and the recoat roof. I went to Karen on this one. Both her and John said there's no need to replace the floor coverings this year. There's not an immediate need. So I pushed it off a year, and I think we can continue to revisit this on a yearly basis. On the roof, they actually had a roof inspector come out, look at the roof. The inspector believes that it could last as long as 5 years. So I've pushed it 2 years, which is when they will next have it inspected. Any questions on those two? They're sort of the same thing, but different reasons. 58, 59, 16, and 46 are solely movement in year. We didn't have a fall town meeting. It can't go into the FY21 budget anymore. So it goes to the spring, which means it's an FY22 expenditure.
Jason, one question, if I may.
Sure.
On 46, that's not going to create an issue with the SCBA match?
So the grant cycle, they continue to roll out grants. Obviously, if Chief Achilles is fortunate to get his department the grant, I think it's going to be a conversation between BOS and advisory of how do you match that in the current fiscal year? Because, yeah, we will have to expend that, but there is also a lead time on getting those, getting the equipment. It's not something you just throw in the store.
Right.
You know, there is some customization. So the good news there is it's 13,000. So between operational budgets and reserve fund, I think we'll figure out a path forward depending upon the collective views.
Okay, thank you.
I hope we have that problem, to be honest. All right, so I'm gonna go to Recreation 9/11 Field. And this is gonna be a little bit of an education. And Kathy, I'm sure you will fill us in because you probably have a lot of history here from how at least advisory viewed this in the past. At least in the capital plan we've been looking at, it kind of showed 9/11, the bond payments on that field being funded through some sort of rec or 9/11 revolving fund. I asked Brian to go back and now that we had officially weren't going to be having a fall town meeting, validate that what we were carrying in the FY20 column is precisely what town meeting voted on, right? Just so I'm not a fan of obviously having schedules that don't talk to each other. And as he did that, he pointed me out to something that I wasn't aware of, and I'm sure it will probably be news to everyone else, is the bond was for 15 years, but it, the ability to repay it through recreations, either revolving fund, but it's really just recreations 9/11 fund. There's an actual separate enterprise fund on it. Is
revolving fund, not enterprise funds. Revolving.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. That's going to take 15 years. In the schedule that there's a separate tab in the Excel capital plan that you have. But long story short is if I look at this year coming up, for example, projected in FY22, we have a debt service, so we owe the bond company $132,000. The recreation director is only saying that they're going to be able to pay 10 of that out of the revolving fund, which means when we think about capital, which includes debt that's already been approved at town meeting, we have about $122,000 expense that's going to be funded out of the general fund.
And this is because we haven't received any revenue this year for fields, correct?
Yeah, but so let's go back.
Because we've never had to come out of pocket like that for that field.
Yeah, so let me give you last year's number, for example. In FY20, it looks like the debt service was $144,000, and the 9/11 was fund paid about $68,000, which left about $76,000 out of the general fund.
Can you go back one more year?
Yeah, so initial year, the debt service was FY19 was $147,000, all of which was paid out of general fund. I don't know, Brian, why that was, because it's not like it was a new field. So I might need your help on that one, Brian.
Yeah, I think year one was because the Recreation Committee hadn't decided on a schedule yet. So we just funded that out of the general fund. So basically what happened was this was probably going to be a 10-year, maybe a 15-year bond. And somehow it got into a 5-year bond. I say somehow because there's some confusion as to when the bond went through. how it went through as a 5-year, but that's passed. So we saved a bunch of interest money, but basically we have 2 more years of subsidizing the recreation, which wouldn't be so bad if it was normal times, because when Doreen was here, she had estimated they could probably pay maybe 40 to 60,000 a year, somewhere around that range. You know, in a healthy year, probably upwards of 60 or 70. Obviously, that's not the case now. I didn't hear the 10,000 a year payment from Tim. I know
it's in the schedule that, Brian, it's in the schedule that you had forwarded me from Tim.
Okay, so he did lower it to 10. I just remembered 20. He was talking about 20, but I guess it doesn't really.
I mean, 10 seems awfully low given, I mean, I've driven by the field many times recently, and I get they had 3 or 4 months of no activity, but that field looks like it's packed now.
I agree. 10 seems a little low, but I know he's trying to be conservative for the next year because of the uncertainty, which I don't disagree with. But so he's trying to, you know, talk to the recreation committee and come up with a schedule that at least is a draft, conservative schedule. And hopefully he can work through that. Last I knew, it was still under discussion. The good news is, that, you know, I'd like to see glass half full, is that we are going to benefit at the outside of the scale, because we're going to be getting a general fund offset when there's no debt payment. So, you know.
Say that again, Brian, one more time.
I'm saying that at the you know, they're going to pay the full amount back. It's just a matter of when the loan is done, they're still going to be paying it back. So we're going to benefit from that a little bit.
Well, we've got to make sure that's the case, and that it's understood that the receipts for the 9/11 revolving fund are going to be restricted until that happens.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any confusion about that. I hope not. Again, this crosses 2 recreation directors, and Doreen was going to undergo some studies with fees, and, you know, understandably with the COVID, that kind of threw that into chaos. So they, you know, last I knew, they were going to study the fees for 911 and kind of come up with more, you know, current, of a more current fee structure. I don't think that ever happened. And so, you know, I guess my point is there's still discussion to be had on that, but Jason's right. It's going to be funded, you know, subsidized through the general fund for the next, actually it's only 2 more years, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, we'll
yeah. I mean, my concern is the 2 toughest years that the town may be facing, right?
Yep.
Brian, can we refinance this and push this out? Maybe even roll it into the fire truck and do it over the next 8 years?
No. So the refinancing, Jason asked me about this a few weeks ago, and legally there's restrictions on it from the IRS, from the federal government, that there has to be several things met. In other words, you have to have a certain savings that comes due that allows you to refinance. The other thing is you have to have a call provision in your bonds to do it. Usually it's a 10-year call provision. That's just standard. So this is a 5-year bond. There's only 2 more years left. It's just not legally possible at this point.
Jason, if I may.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I am a little concerned, only because town meeting was specifically asked, this isn't going to hit the tax rate, that this is all going to be, you know, paid through the revolving fund. And now we're 3 years in, and essentially it is coming out of the tax rate. And I understand through the tail end of this, it'll all catch up with itself and make its way back. But I worry it was a little disingenuous to the taxpayers at town meeting when the question was specifically asked.
Not only that, I guess I just don't remember correctly, but I remember being at the Board of Selectmen meeting where Jim Haggerty was there, Doreen was there, and this has got to be 2 years ago, where he was making sure that the money did get moved out of the revolving fund to pay the debt service. So saying that the first year it came out of the general fund doesn't sound right to me, although I know Brian keeps his records.
2 years, Kathy, have come out already. I think 2 years have already come out if you look at the schedule.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I remember that in the very first year it didn't, and then 2 came after it. Okay.
So I'm not sure there's a lot this committee can do about it, but I think when I look at capital, I think it's the sum of what we're approving this year, but it's also the sum of what town meeting has already approved, right? So if town meeting has approved a lot of articles and we have a high debt service, it impacts our ability to fund out of the general fund in a given year, because you only have so much money on capital without sacrificing operations. So
well, that's why it's relevant, because we've got to understand the debt service before we can understand what we can spend on new capital. Not that we are going to change this at all, but we do need to understand what our committed debt service is.
And I think there's nothing that specifically the capital planning committee can do. But what I would say is, given that our work touches on so many other committees, is I personally would love to see someone look at the fees, right, and just make sure we're actually charging market. Obviously, it's not something we can request as capital planning, but obviously, you know, Lisa from a BOS seat, you know, there's. What'd you say?
We've got someone here that can do that.
Yeah, but I also think instead of having one debt service line that gets presented to town meeting, I think it's really important that we start to show them all of the components that sum to the debt principal and interest line that they're approving, because I can't remember a town meeting where anyone's questioned that amount, because really can't, right? But at the same time, I think it will help people start to understand the decisions that they make at town meeting. It's not really about the initial expense. It's about how you pay it off and what that timing is. So right now we're in the midst of all of these projects that were done 3-4 years ago that were bonded over a 5-year period, not the 20-year periods, right? And I'm not saying these all should have been bonded over longer periods of time, but I just think it's important from a transparency perspective, because that's candidly how I found it. So I think this schedule needs to be iterative. It needs to be updated as Tim has better details from the Recreation Commission. I know they did talk about it at their last meeting, but I also think it's a matter of the town understanding what these things cost, not just in year one, but over the course of their life.
Jason, did they say anything why, you know, if we're don't have enough 9/11 offset, that we're using general fund and not using rec revolving fund? I feel like we should hit that next before we hit the general fund.
There's not that much money in the rec revolving fund to do this when you really look at it. So that's why they're going to say it. And they have earmarked what is left to do other things. So they've just got other plans for it. And there's really not that much left. You know, we tried to allocate more salaries to it. And when you really looked at what was there, there wasn't a lot. So I think
like
your answer is, it's a good answer, but I don't think there's enough to do it.
I thought there was like 300 or 400K left.
No.
That's the expenses that they can spend in a year.
Yeah,
So they put on a program, they charge $100, but maybe their expenses are $90 to put on the program. So my understanding of the rec revolving fund is that it has to directly relate to the programs that they're providing. So unless they're actually providing programs on 9/11 field, which I don't know if that's the case or not, I'm not sure that they can actually do that.
The only reason there's more money in it than you might think is because it's built up over the years, because they were trying to build up a fund to maybe fund a whole new rec facility. The profit each year is less than $100,000, much less. So there's not that much each year left over to do much else. I wish there were. But once we realized that, we kind of gave up on trying to get more expenses allocated to it.
Any questions on that one? All right, next one is a lot simpler. This was just based on feedback at the last meeting. We had roads and sidewalks combined together. I think the general consensus of the committee was to keep these separate line items. So we've never had a sidewalk appropriation, at least in the last couple of years. I shouldn't say never. I haven't seen a sidewalk appropriation. So now that's one of the things coming forward this year. And then there's obviously the traditional road maintenance. So all I did was just separate those. Those amounts can be adjusted as the years go on and we see what needs are needed in town. Any questions on that? Row 99, South Union had something for this year related to exterior painting and building maintenance / general repairs. Obviously, until we figure out what we're doing with South Union, it seems silly to put money into that. So I did confirm with Mr. Parent that there was nothing there that would like cause the building to close while we worked through that. And he said it was all predominantly aesthetics for this year. So that has been pushed off a year. Any questions on that? Townhouse windows. This is where we took the 675 that John had been holding as a placeholder, brought it down to 400. And then Brian produced a bonding schedule on that. And then row 106 is the exterior renovation work, which was scheduled for one more year out. It's been moved forward to the current year, but also increased to tie to the engineering report. And Brian did do a bond schedule out as well. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were using a 3% interest rate on the bonds?
Yep.
Okay. So I think last week you got some approved for like 1%, just over 1%. So it does give us some wiggle room in the event the market changes for these sorts of things by the time you actually go out to bond. Any questions on that? Water bonds. So there are some water projects that were approved in the past. In tying out the debt schedules, Brian and I both thought we should get them on here, even though they're out of a separate fund, just for completeness, because there will be water projects in the future that use this for purposes of funding mechanism. The next two, 87 and 88, Brian was carrying in the capital plan 2.5 million for public safety debt, for permanent debt that hadn't been bonded. 500 of it was a short-term related to personal equipment. 2 million of it was actual building itself. Based on where the numbers came in, he only bonded 275 for personal property and 1725 for the actual building itself. So this closes out all debt. So we now have permanent debt on the entire building. And obviously, given the interest rate conditions, the interest dropped over the years as well. So really what's now reflected in the capital plan is actual principal and interest for the next 20 years or 5 years, depending on which line you're referring to, as opposed to Brian's best estimate. This obviously was a very favorable answer because not only the principal dropped, but the interest dropped as well.
So when did the financing of the last tranche take place?
Last week.
Okay, and was that in the budget for fiscal year 21, Brian?
No.
So it's going to have a negative impact on the budget, right?
It's going to have a slight negative impact, but based on the valuations and the new growth, I think we'll be able to cover it. At least that's what it sounds like so far.
Well, the valuations are skewed toward the residential side, so that's going to hurt us too. So I'm not sure we're not going to end up with a much bigger year-over-year increase than what we had predicted, but we can talk about that later.
Brian, do you know what the delta is? Because I know you had a temporary note for at least 50,000 in the budget. So if I add the sum of what the new numbers are.
Are you, Jason, are you talking about this year or next year?
This year, fiscal year 21.
FY21.
Yeah, fiscal year 21, it's going to be about, it's under 50,000. It's probably 40,000, something like that. That's the general fund.
You had, at least in the old capital plan, 49,863 for a temporary note this year. So
yep.
I'm not
and that's
sure
that
we're.
Gone, but there's going to be another 30 to 40,000 in a interest payment in March.
So you're saying we're going to pay so I guess in the numbers that you provided us, you're estimating 30,000 of principal and interest in FY21 on these permanent bonds. Are you saying we've also already incurred 50,000 in interest?
Right. Yep.
Okay, so your delta, Kathy, is 30,000.
For the interest on the temporary bond, yeah.
Okay, so everybody agree our delta is what Jason said, $30,000, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay.
Any questions on those? For next year, it's a lot better, I guess is probably how I should have put it.
Yeah.
CPA library restoration. So this is now a permanent bond as well. It's CPA funded, but it's now in here. And then NERI renovations, phase 2 and phase 3. So these are really old projects, but this was one, Brian, where you were able to refinance, is my understanding. So the total principal and interest payments for the next couple of years are now lower as a result of that. I think the savings was roughly $60,000 based on what I saw.
Correct.
So that's not all this year, but over the term. Are there any questions on any of those?
Do we know how
That's
much?
it as far as what we've done to refinance things. We've financed the last tranche of the public safety building, and we've refinanced the 2 old NERI notes.
In the library CPA bond.
Okay, that one I'm not concerned about because that's not coming out.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So Brian, what else is out there to be bonded? Just the fire truck for next year? And anything we do
Fire
with
truck
town
and the
meeting?
fin boiler.
Okay.
Did they actually finish installing the fin boiler?
They are well on their way of the project. I'd say they're probably, just by their payments, probably 40 or 50% in.
They were supposed to get it done over the summer.
No comment.
All right. So I think it's good to have a motion. Lisa, you're not helping. Ben,
I miss
I'll be
those
right back.
days. Jason, I miss those days.
Yeah. He's telling me it's taking too long. So I think it's good to have a motion at each meeting that we're in agreement on these changes. So I will move that the committee supports the changes dated 9/14. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call. BRACCIO?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Park?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Pfaff?
Aye.
And Malinowski, aye. Before we go into the next item, in the actual packet, right, and obviously in the Excel that you all have access to as well, you can see the pivot of what's in front of us for FY22, and you can also see kind of what the funding looks like if we execute this capital plan exactly as it stands now and where our bad years are. So those are the two I continue to look at least in terms of as my barometer of where we're trending. Obviously, there are capital needs that we don't know about here that will come up at some point in time. There are also capital needs that hopefully will come off due to grant funding or other means of funding, but we'll obviously carry them until we get some of that. Any questions on any of those two sheets specifically? All right. Capital planning with the school committee. So in terms of a timeline and a process, I've had multiple phone conversations with Mr. Challen, the chair of the Southborough School Committee. I've also had a conversation with him and Superintendent Martineau at both of their suggestions, just to kind of hash out how best to go about this, but while also realizing the situation that they're currently in. The school committee also discussed last Wednesday night what level of involvement they would like. As any of you that follow them, they have significant number of subcommittees that they also have, under the school committee. Plus, obviously, they're dealing with a situation now that probably none of them anticipated when they ran for election to that seat. So where we landed was we were going to put together a subcommittee that would have one representative from the school committee. And we have tentatively agreed on 2 capital planning members. It would fall as a subcommittee under capital planning. So ultimately the appointment authority for any of this goes to BOS. So Miss Martin from the Southborough School Committee has been the recommended member to participate from their side. So what we are going to do tonight is review a charge and select our membership for recommendation to the BOS. Obviously, it's up to them on who they want to appoint, but that's what we're working through here. I think it's really important from a timeline perspective, and I sort of gave everyone a heads up on this the other day. This study committee would only be around through the end of this calendar year. And really, it's to inform a decision of, is consolidation of the schools viable, right? That's the ultimate kind of goal of what everyone wants to figure out. Everyone is working jointly towards that goal. No one's fighting an uphill battle. No one's also saying anything is off the table, which I think is really important when you go down this road, that we have, no boundaries, and we see where kind of the research takes us. After this committee submits their recommendations, the goal would be there would be meetings of both the school committee and this committee, and we would all have like what I'll call a first vote to either tell this subcommittee to go back to work because there's something there that we don't necessarily like or we don't agree with, or whether we agree with the work of the body and that we then would make a joint presentation to BOS and advisory. The timing is as such that if you look at kind of the FY22 capital request, they have significant requests for NERI. While the school committee has not voted yet, they have pulled their request for funding from MSBA for NERI for the roof until we figure out what the body of work that's going to be undertaken here tells us. So if we came to a situation where we did have some sort of consolidation, we all know there's still going to be work to be done at NERI. So what does that body of work look like, and what does the future hold for that building? So really coming up with a collective path forward on all buildings. And then it would allow them to submit any sort of statement of intent by May for anything they may need to do to NERI or any other building in the future. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any, general questions on what the timing is, what the process looks like before we go forward with the charge and the actual membership.
So to be clear as to what the timeline is going to allow us to do, it looks to me like there's probably 3 parts to this. First one is to update the study done in 2013 to determine whether it's even feasible that the demographics would allow us to close one of the schools. And if that's a yes, I mean, this is a critical path, I think. You've got to decide that first. And if that answer is yes, you could, if you chose to do it. And second, you've got to determine what school would be the more likely one, the better one of the 3, and it's probably 2, to close. And then once you have gotten that decision, or at least waiting on that, then the third one is to understand the cost of what you would have to do on the one that remains open, right? To allow it to house more students than it does right now. What do you do with the superintendent's office, et cetera? So I don't think we're going to get 1, 2, and 3 done by the end of the year. I see 1 being done, possibly with a whole lot of work, but there's a lot of decisions that are sequential that have to be made to get to the point that you really have a full recommendation as to what we believe would be in the town's best interest.
Yes. And I think really what we're trying to understand by the end of the year, and we may find we can't get there because of some gating factor, but that's at least the initial goal, is, is there a path forward, or is there something in the way that just says, this is why you stop here and don't discuss this topic any further? But I think the town has been yearning for this conversation for quite some time, and, we shall see where it goes. But I think the way you outlined it, Kathy, is exactly correct. Any other questions on timeline and process? Okay. My intent would be whoever is representing this committee would have a standing members report at each of our meetings to just update on where they're at. We'll have to come up with some parameters that all of us don't join any sort of subcommittee meetings in the actual live feed, because it would be a subcommittee meeting, not a capital plan, but we still can watch and, I think provide valid feedback to the group through the members report section at each meeting saying, hey, we're going down this path, what do you think, sort of thing. But I also would recommend whoever we vote on in terms of membership, that they be open to feedback from the rest of the group and really bring back, hey, we're thinking about this. Is there a different angle we should take, et cetera? Because I would assume that's what Ms. Martin will do on the school committee side as well. So I guess any questions on the draft charge? All right. Seeing a lot of heads shake no. I guess I'll move that we approve the draft charge for submission to the Board of Selectmen for further consideration. There a second?
Second.
Seconded by Andrew. Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call. BRACCIO?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Hark?
Aye.
Palmer?
Aye.
Pfaff?
Aye.
And Malinowski is aye. I should have also stated before we did that, but Mr. Challen, as the chair of the Southborough School Committee, had already looked at it as well and weighed in that he thought it was appropriate and didn't bind our hands in any way in terms of the future. All right, so now we have to talk about who we actually want to sit on the subcommittee. Obviously, this is a recommendation only. Our vote, is only that. And Board of Selectmen will have appointment authority. My understanding is it will be on the 9/22 agenda unless for some reason they meet before then for an unforeseen situation. So I don't know, any thoughts, anyone, any views of how we proceed here?
I'll go first, I guess. So there are 3 advisory members that make up the committee. So I think based on ratios, there's probably going to be at least 1 advisory member. There's a school committee member. And I'd be curious to see if Joe or Jeff had an interest in serving on this. I mean, I think it's if they don't, I'll say this. If I would always prefer that someone else have an opportunity to do something, but if they don't have an interest in doing it, not that I have such a surplus of time, I think it would be a good balance to have an advisory, a Board of Selectmen, and a school committee member on the discussion. But I won't even suggest that. If Mr. Palmer or Mr. Hark have a interest in doing this, I would be happy to support that.
Can I make an alternative suggestion? And
Sure.
I'm totally just thinking about this for the first time. there really are three, I think, discrete phases of this. I don't know that the same people have to be involved all the way through. The people that I think need to be involved in that first phase, because it's very analytical. So we're talking about updating a report that took 8 months to put together the first time with 15 people in the committee, and everybody did quite a bit of work. So there is going to be a lot of work, a lot of data to comb through. We've got the money. We're not starting from scratch. It won't be as many hours as last time, but it's going to be a lot. So I would say that you want 3 people, 2 from advisory, from CPC, to be the type of people that are used to doing that, as far as what they do for a living, what they do otherwise. And I don't know who that is, because I still am not quite sure what, Joe and Jeff do. I know what Andrew does. I don't know what Jason does, and I know what Lisa does. But it doesn't mean that the same people then have to go to the next phase, which is, okay, we've decided that we've got the demographics that will allow us to do it. Now let's decide whether we think we should do it. Then that's a different type of person. So I'm not sure we have to have the same 3 people. We could, but I'm not sure we have to.
So Kathy, on that, how would we then? We would have to adjust the charge, because the charge you have now is for 2 people. What, you would have 2 people resign and 2 other people step forward? I mean, what are your thoughts on how that process?
Well, as I said, it's the first time I thought about it tonight, so it's no deep thinking here. It's just, I just know how much work went into that first one. So be careful what you ask for here, or what you volunteer for. Because I think that's where I think the lion's share of the work will go. I think the next 2 phases, well, the third phase is going to be big too, if you really decide to, rehab Neary and take Woodward out of the school picture. So I don't know, Lisa. I don't know why, if anybody thought this was reasonable, why you wouldn't then go for something and say, okay, now for the second phase, we'd like to replace this person with this person and ask them to move it. So I'm just saying, this is truly, I hadn't thought about this.
Well, I guess maybe if Jason, just ask, who has an interest first, and we can kind of go from there. I don't know if, again, I'm going to go back to Mr. Palmer and Mr. Hark. I mean,
let's start with Jeff and Joe, and then we can move.
Okay.
So I don't know, Jeff or Joe, your thoughts.
I would say I would be interested. I just don't know if I can commit that amount of time between now and December, unfortunately, to give it the time and effort that it needs for what it warrants. I don't know if I could commit that up right now.
I'm listening to the conversation, and the first thought that's running through my mind is that it would seem that in the very confined space of time that there is here, that somebody with the most knowledge to plow through the material fastest would make the most sense to get through the first stage or 2. I mean, the whole process is going to be predicated on demographics for the most part to begin with. So understanding not just what happened in the past, but really present and future demographics are going to determine whether we're going to be able to go, sort of step 2, in the next couple of steps beyond that. I mean, the whole process may end up getting sort of cut off halfway through, and that's not a problem. That's less work, but not having if you get beyond that first step with the demographics, having an in-depth understanding of the way that this is all, how the schools became, and the process of building up the school system will be incredibly important in how you're going to manage the transition to that next space. So actually maybe having 2 or 3 people, or 1 person for each stage, for instance, might actually make the best sense as to which one of us would be the best to have at each individual stage. I think is my first thought. I'm not opposed to trying to plow in and do, a lion's share of work to catch up. But I have the feeling that, the first couple of weeks are really just going to be playing catch up for whoever, at least for me. I don't know, maybe it'll be the same for Jeff, but I don't have an in-depth knowledge of, the school logistics and the history of the school logistics. So catching up on that will take a couple weeks. But I'm willing to do that. If the committee likes that idea, I'm more than happy to try and jump into that.
I guess I'll share just one view is I think we need to try to keep it to 2. I just keep hearing 3 thrown out there. The only reason I want to stay with it. I know Kathy outlined 3 stages, but we have 2 members in the church. I just want to make sure we keep those separate, right? Because I think it's really important that we not try to, I'll call it, add more to the committee. The reason it came about in this structure, and the reason the school committee came back with this proposed approach is because they think, it's really more of a working group. I know the charge calls it a subcommittee, but really this is just, people that are going to be willing to roll up their sleeves, get into the data. Now, look, if those 3 people get in there and are like, this is more than anyone can handle, right? And Kathy noted how many people were involved in the initial report. There's no saying that someone can't come back and ask, right, for more help, right? And I would be naive to think that someone whether BOS is the appointing authority or school committee, if we say, we need this sort of skill set from our 2 bodies, or maybe a 3rd body that we're not currently working with, that we wouldn't do that to get to the right result, given, this impacts every demographic group in town, not just those with kids in schools. It impacts the future of your senior center. It impacts the users of recreation. It impacts pretty much every taxpayer, obviously, in their pocket. So I think that this will grow over time depending on where you go, but I just wanted to point that out. I also think we need some consistency at the same time to make sure, things stay, right? So I'm not opposed to, if we get to a phase someone doesn't have the time, or someone doesn't, have the perfect skill set. We do need to have some sort of consistent picture, because I think that's also where you just tend to drop things, right? And not on purpose, but it's just the nature of how any of these things work. So those are my 2 thoughts that I'll weigh in there.
So Jason, where did the number 3 come from? Who decided that 3 was the right number for the subcommittee?
It was sort of an informal conversation between Roger and myself. The school committee didn't vote on that, but I feel they voted on sending 1 member, and they knew that we were thinking of 2, right? It's not like they sent 2, we were sending 2 to even. So I don't feel comfortable having 3 capital planning, because then let's just say there is some disconnect between what capital planning is thinking and the school committee rep are. Then you pretty much have 3 to 1, 3 to 1 on an issue. It's a lot different than 2 to 1, to be completely honest, in terms of you still have a majority, but, you also could have a 2-2. And I don't think having even numbers on such a small committee makes sense. So that's really where it came from. The school committee offered 1 person. So, and they knew that we would be leading it and would have more. But my goal is anything that comes forward is a 3-0 vote from whoever these folks are.
Well, I would point out that no one on the current school committee was on that subcommittee. So therefore, they didn't have a lot of background to know how much time it took. So that may be why they think 1's fine.
So remember, the other option they talked about was just having this committee of 6 run with it. But the more they thought about it, they thought having a smaller working group to start. Again, I think flexibility is really the key here. Is whoever we send forward, right, working with Ms. Martin, needs to be ready to raise their hand and say, we're in over our head. We can't do this as 3, and here's why. This is what we need. Say we're trending fine, but we're open to feedback from both groups, right? That's, I think, what the standing members report that I envision is. I'll give it as long as whoever these 2 people are want, because it's so important in our meetings, and that's probably going to be a key agenda topic for us as we head into the winter. I mean, we're in pretty good shape for next year. We have some things to button up, but this is going to drive where we go with Corderville. This is going to drive where we go with the library. This is going to drive where we go with all the recreation needs that are in town.
I agree, but until the decision has been legally made to close the school, which has, that's a school committee vote, right? That's not our vote. That's not the town vote, the school committee. We're still a long way from that happening. And so, we're going to have to continue with the overall capital plan with some assumptions, I think. So, okay, I'm fine with starting with 3. So I'm sitting here thinking about what all has to be done. Last time we actually went as far as, estimating the operating costs that we're going to say. We just assumed that NEAR was going to be shuttered, not replaced, not used. This is different. We're going to use whatever building we shutter for something else. So there's a lot into that computation. So we wanted to do that with phase one. I think, phase one is just focused on whether the demographics support closing the school. And we stick to that. Then I think 3 can probably do it. But, it's going to be a lot of work.
Was the 2013 report or the 2013 report the one that was already included in materials that we had at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay, that did include the demographic chart. I do remember that.
Yes.
We spent a lot of time on demographics. That was kind of the whole ball game. And then we got into, well, then should we do it if we can? We concluded we could. Democrats supported it. So understand, we concluded we could, but there was such a fear that if we closed a school, and we would had to have closed Neary back then because we would have lost the reimbursement for Woodward. That's not a problem anymore. Woodward's about to be paid off, so we can close Woodward. Back then we couldn't. And so then the issue was, okay, if we make a mistake and close the school and have to reopen Neary, the cost for doing so was going to be prohibitive because it was going to have to be retrofitted with all ADA and da-da-da-da. So that's what caused the decision to be made the way it was in 2013. We could have done it. The decision was made not to do it. The committee recommended that we not do it, and it went no further.
But you felt confident that you could fit all the students that are there in the other buildings, and the idea was to close Neary entirely? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you'd also lose the gyms and the other facilities that a lot of the youth sports are using.
Yep, so it was going to save about $400,000 a year. We're going to close Neary completely and sell it, do something, but not use it for town property. The reason there was a lot of concern is because the demographics, it's not a science. There's a lot of art into it. They can predict demographics all they want to. The closer it is, the better off they are. But there can be some big swings in demographics, and we know about one that would cause it to be swung here. So that's why you have to be careful too, and have some cushion in those demographic numbers. And we put cushion in, but they were still concerned that if they were off, we would have a problem.
Yeah, and I think we should be pretty clear that I think the potential school that's in play here is Woodward. Because now of the change in facts that Kathy outlined, we got 3 years left of that, right? So this is going to take a long time to figure out an ultimate plan. And part of this work would also be looking at Neary. What does it need? If Woodward closes, obviously Neary has to stay open. So what does it need? Or is there another plan that we're not thinking about? But Woodward is very attractive to the town from a think about central location versus Neary is very attractive to the schools it's a campus, right? So now you have all but one school on a campus, the fields, the ability to do things side by side, but also create flexibility for those unknowns, right? Like I know Kathy has floated Park Central in the past, but like what other developments may come to town, right? During the time that these schools are up.
That bring a bunch of kids with it.
Need. Yeah.
So Jason, but I don't think we should be careful. We should not be biased toward one building or the other. We should look at them both and weigh the pros and cons of either one so that we've shown the town we've done it. So someone else come in and say, well, you went into this thinking you were going to close Neary. Or close.
Yeah. And
after listening to the past couple of years, especially rec, losing, especially they were going to think about putting the AstroTurf over at Woodward now because the Neary neighborhood objected to lights and the AstroTurf. So either school represents a very significant asset to rec because rec desperately wants the gyms and the fields from both of them. So it'll be in talking about even releasing a school, we're going to have some difficulty in terms of facilities for a rec in the town.
Well, we can include some other rec options if we need to.
Sure.
Yeah, Andrew. Andrew's going to see the table. And of course, there's nothing that's more emotional in this town, which I know Lisa would be within talking about the schools. So it's not necessarily always an objective determination. You can give people science and statistics all you want to, and does it still mean that's the way they're going to vote?
No, I agree, Kathy. I don't think whatever the decision is going to be easy. I know Woodward has been floated around for a while. The opportunity to have a complex with fields and everything at Neary. Joe, just to your point on Woodward. So no matter what takes place with Woodward, the fields out front, and Kathy, you can correct me on this, the fields out front are covered by a trust, the Choate Trust, and it is meant to stay fields no matter what. And that is overseen by Fay, St. Mark's, and Recreation. Am I speaking correctly on that, Kathy? I know there was a discussion on this.
It's Fay, St. Mark's, and the two heads of school and our superintendent.
Okay.
And we had to, So, sorry. But I believe, I thought I was the chair of the school committee, the Southborough School Committee, but I could be wrong because we had to take 35 feet of that property for purposes of public safety access driveway. But of course, everyone worked together, so none of that was happening in a vacuum with those three leaders, whoever they may be at each school. But that has to remain a field.
Yeah.
And in the closing of schools, in the past, when you looked at it, Catherine, were labor costs factored into any labor savings, or was it really just facility savings?
It was facility savings. We still had the same number of teachers. So no, it was really facilities, literally utilities and cleaning and things like that. And it was $400,000 back then. So it wasn't as big as we thought, which also didn't get people very excited. So yeah, it was just literally the building itself. There's the same number of teachers. Yeah,
because I remember when we were looking at the budgets, it was the school labor costs that were really driving a lot of the inflation moving forward. At least
absolutely. It's all labor. Yep,
yeah, we voted in that 3% pay increase over a bunch of years, and so interesting.
So I guess with all that being said, we still need to find two people who the committee would most support to carry this forward.
I'm willing to jump in and give it a full swing. I'm a little rusty on a lot of the demographics, but I had to go to business school, so working with economics and demographics was part of the deal. You end up digging through the census a lot and doing a lot of comparisons and charts and graphs, but.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening, Jason, to both sides of this, and I'm kind of torn between. We got a lot going on with this committee and advisory going into the budget, but I think I do like Lisa's idea of having somebody from advisory. And if you're the chair of this committee and Kathy's the chair of advisory, in the analytical side, I can handle it. The only other question is I'm not sure whether or not it's a benefit or a hindrance. I don't have any kids. I did attend both Woodward, Neary, and Finn as a student many years ago, but I don't have any kids in the school or any kids, so I don't know if that helps with that demographic question or is a hindrance, but just something to throw out there.
Okay.
All right. Well, all right. So, all right. I think Jason should be one of the people that serves on it. I think he has the background from the public safety building. I think he's done a great job as chair. I think he can delve in if he has the time. And if he's willing to do it, I'd like one of the two people to be Jason. So I make a motion that one of the people that we recommend to the Board of Selectmen for the Capital Planning Committee, School Research Subcommittee be Jason Malinowski.
For a second.
I'll second.
So I guess I should probably respond to that.
Before we vote, can I just, as far as comment goes, I'm fine if Jason's one of the two, but I don't think we should preclude Andrew from being the second just because he's advisory too. So I don't want to preclude Andrew because Jason's there. And I will say this, I would prefer to be on this because I think I can help with what I did before. I've got a whole lot of information that I still got from before too. But
now, Kathy, you're the only one on either advisor in this committee or in selectmen that was on the committee before, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I think that's another.
But I also don't want to sit here and act like Susie Know-It-All either.
I think Susie Know-It-All helps a lot. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Can we do Jason first? Then I think we're on a path here. So.
Well, as long as you will let two advisory ones do it. So that's what I'm trying to get you to agree to.
I'm smiling. My only reservation in having two advisory members is I think it's an important decision, and it's an important decision to step forward and to not have a member to be able to come back and update the board. I mean, Jason can come back, he can update advisory, he can update the capital committee, but having a board member that then has to take secondhand information back, though I can watch the meetings. So I wouldn't be adverse, Kathy, to Jason and or yourself, put it that way. I think if Mr. Palmer's fine with that, I mean, I always want to extend the invitation to somebody new that may not have done it before as well. So that was, if Mr. Palmer's fine with starting this way, we can, we look at things if we want down the road, but I would.
Experience is expediency.
Okay, so.
The other one, Lisa, is, as a BOS member, if you want to amend the charge to include a BOS member and maybe not have 3 people from this committee yourself, but maybe Sam or Marty or somebody else from BOS wanted to be on. I mean, I know Jason didn't want 3 and 1, but maybe 2, 1 and 1. I don't know.
I think the board will be okay. I do. I can't speak for them, obviously, but when this discussion comes before the Board of Selectmen at the next meeting, I can let them know how comfortable I am with the decision that was made here tonight. And I wholeheartedly support it. And I think that will carry some level of weight. Well, I hope so anyway. Okay, so Jason, I guess back to you to finish you first. And then I think we already have a second motion ready to go.
So I guess, while I have a lot of things going on, I think this is, I think one of the most important things that will guide the work of this committee. So that would be what would drive me to put, I guess, the extra time into it. But I only want to do it if the committee is comfortable with me helping to lead the effort and guide us down the right path. But I hope that you have found, at least through our meetings since April, that I try to bring back everything I learn. Obviously, there's surprises every meeting, I feel like, right? But, try and open everyone up to everything I'm seeing, what you're seeing, and trying to, I think that's what's going to make this successful. And at least my initial interactions with Mr. Challen and Mr. Martineau have been incredibly positive. And I think tone does set a lot of our path forward. I haven't spoken with Ms. Martin yet because I was waiting to see where the committee goes. Kind of wondering what's happening with Lisa.
Somebody who hit the wrong light switch, obviously.
It's payback for laughing at me for the first hour, right?
I know. Okay, so we've had a second. So
I didn't hear an official second, so I just wanted. I think okay.
Joe did. Yep.
Okay. All right. So we have any other discussion on that motion? All right. So we have to do roll call. BRACCIO.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Vaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski abstain.
So can I make a second motion?
Go ahead.
I would like to make a motion that we appoint Kathy Cook as the second member of the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee, based on, I think, her history on this and her dedication as well will definitely serve everybody well.
Second.
All right, so I heard a second from Joe before Andrew, so I'll give second to Joe. Is there any further conversation?
So just to be clear, Joe, are you okay with this?
I am 100% on board.
Andrew?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it doesn't mean that we can't replace me for sure with phase 2, phase 3, but this one I think kind of makes sense.
Well, I think I'm in play on that too, Kathy, right?
It'll speed this process along.
Agreed.
Is there any further discussion? All right, BRACCIO.
Aye.
Cook.
Abstain.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski, aye. All right.
Okay.
On
So
to our next.
officially stacked with advisory.
That's okay.
On to item 6. recommendations and next steps coming out of transfer station presentation. I know some of us had questions, some of us were reflecting during
Robert, can you come?
At the end of Mr. Butler's presentation. Here is how I was planning to take this conversation, but I'm open to feedback before we go down either rabbit hole. I think there was a specific element of Mr. Butler's presentation that specifically dealt with the capital needs. And I guess in his opinion, the lack thereof of them in terms of investing in the transfer station for a 31-year payback or whatever his quoted amount. I think the committee should discuss that specifically. And if we're ready, vote on that, because as a reminder, there still is nothing in the capital plan for the transfer station. So that was going to be part one of the conversation. Then part two was going to be, how do we dispose of the series of other items that he had in that presentation that, in my view, are clearly beyond the scope of our committee? And how do we effectively either hand the ball off more or volunteer someone on this committee to work with Mr. Butler to advance them at the will of BOS, advisory, Public Works Planning Board, or anyone else that may have a stake in that. So that's how I'm going to divide the conversation. I'm going to start with the capital part, but I guess before I do, does anyone have any questions on the format of that discussion?
No, but I apologize for the yell. I couldn't shut my mute off before I called my son to come get the cat. So okay. I apologize.
All right, so let's talk capital. Did anyone have, I guess, any views and or a need or want to see additional data to support Mr. Butler's, I guess, confirmation or recommendation that we not invest heavily in the transfer station at this time?
No.
I would say I'm totally on board with the, not invest heavily in the transportation. The only part that I had a little bit of a knowledge gap was in terms of like picking up from small businesses and whether or not we want to use our excess capacity, but that would be more like capital for a dump truck or a trash truck, not for the station, but
okay.
It's kind of a different discussion, but capital related.
I think that's part B then. We'll put that in your part B bucket. Okay. So I'm not hearing anyone that has any sort of items. So, I mean, if you think back what this decision means though, right? Like, especially given, I'll call it the relative amount of silence on this, is we had been carrying a $3 million capital item. We had a $35,000 budgetary item that was supposed to go do an analysis on that. I mean, that essentially is disappearing if we support that recommendation. And I think, to me, I was surprised at the result, which is also why in the Q&A I made sure Karen was comfortable with it as the department head, because obviously sometimes you can have different paths forward that have multiple merits. But I think this is a good lesson, I think, to the town of not jumping in feet first into something just because we haven't done something on it for so many years, and that there may be other better uses of funding. So that's where I came out coming at the meeting. So I personally think that we should motion, and I'm going to motion right now, that we support the recommendations of Mr. Butler, that we do not undertake any substantial renovations to the transfer station as part of our current capital plan analysis.
Second that.
Second.
All right. Seconded by Andrew. Any further conversation? All right.
Anything you want to say, Jason, is it, if this is the case, this is alone worth having this committee. Success right there.
Well said, Andrew. Well said.
All right. With that, I'll leave it on that note. So BRACCIO.
Aye.
Cook.
Aye.
Hark.
Aye.
Palmer.
Aye.
Pfaff.
Aye.
And Malinowski, aye. All right. So now there's a whole series of other items that I think warrant action by someone. But in just reading our charge and not being someone that I'd like to stay in my swim lane, so to say, and I don't like to get out unless someone asks me to get out of my swim lane. So what I wanted to kind of get the temperature of this committee is I know Mr. Butler is making a condensed presentation next week to BOS. And I thought—
And to advisory on the 23rd.
Perfect. I thought it would be appropriate that in those presentations that there be some recommendation from capital of either A, we have a member, let's just say, that is willing to continue to work through this with Mr. Butler, given that he isn't an appointed member of any committee. There's surveys that clearly need to be done. There's reach out with the Board of Health, et cetera. Do we want to have someone kind of continue to work through this to make sure that 3 years down the road, we don't have a sudden change in the vote we just took because of changing nature of operations, or we don't have the right data? Or do we want to just break up all of the recommendations and I'll call it, do a handoff to BOS advisory? And I would think Public Works Planning Board should be weighing in here as well. They have been invited to all of our open meetings as well and alerted well in advance. So I have no preconceived notion other than I'm always weary of handoffs. And we got this thing so far, like we literally got it into the end zone, and now we're kicking the extra point is how I would probably put it. And I know when I think back to Selectwoman Faniff, she was yearning for this analysis for many years. I remember every year in budget season, she would ask, and there was kind of a, oh, it's still fine sort of thing. We're not going to look at other options. I just think we would be neglecting our duties if we just kind of said, we're done because it's outside of our charge. So I'm fine referring it off to whoever it be. I just want to make sure the handoff is crisp. I don't have a view one way or another what we should do. But I just feel the need to tee it up and figure out where we want to go.
I like the idea, Jason, of having someone from this committee, preferably not me, not my swim lane either. So, be involved in this. I mean, it was very eye-opening. It's certainly not where I expected it to go either. So I would support having someone other than myself be involved in this.
And I'll take the opposite case for that. So that's one case. I think that we should do the graceful handoff. I don't think that the other issues that were raised are in our bailiwick. For example, whether the fee should be in the tax base or not, that's clearly not in our bailiwick. All the issues with recycling, the issue whether we want to try to expand, increase our sales. I just don't see how that fits into our charge. But I do think someone should look at them, so I don't want them dropped. I think we should put together a very clear list and make sure advisory is going to take up a couple of these, so I can just tell you that right now. And just make sure that we have delineated everything else that's in there that seem to be beyond our bailiwick. So at least I'm like you, I want it done. I just don't think I don't think this committee should be the one that does it.
So can I throw something out there? And Andrew, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you threw out an interest in the small business picking up, right? But I guess, do you have an interest in this particular topic in general, or is it not?
Not really in general. If I was going to do a deep dive, I'd probably do a deep dive on recreation.
Okay.
I think to Kathy's point, I think we can go through the list of these things, preferably before BOS meets with Mr. Butler or the meeting after, especially things like, does the Board of Health now want to regulate trash pickup? That should be something we suggest that the Board of Selectmen move forward with that and have a list of that and that they can review while it's still fresh in their mind to kind of move that forward. But I think, some things go to advisory, some things should go to Public Works Planning Board. I think we could have something on our agenda every, couple months where we review these things, and maybe we select one person to just kind of stay on top of it and, present at that meeting, updates from the different areas on how they're working on those kind of action items. But I think it's more of an action item with a responsible I'm not sure how many of those items would sit in this committee versus others, but I think keeping an eye on it is certainly warranted because we're so vested in it.
Okay. I'll scratch my idea then based on that response. I think you know where I was going probably, but.
Well, he could do it through advisory.
That's what I was going to ask you, Kathy, right? Is if Andrew had an interest in it, I was going to say, would you be willing to put something on your agenda to have advisory vote on a member to move it forward? Because then BOS would likely be responsive as well to, hey, we want to see the feedback of that and where we can, right? Because ultimately they decide, right, in their discussions of whether to put it in the tax rate or not, right? And then ultimately that's what ends up in town meeting floor, right? Which both committees vote on. So I was just trying to find a way to have a common link back to this group, because it doesn't sound like we want to let go fully, but it seems like we don't really have anyone unless Joe or Jeff say otherwise that really wants to kind of further analyze this.
Or we could do a joint thing with advisory, and I think EDC might be the best one for that, because you really need to survey the businesses to see if they would be interested, how much they're paying, what kind of the business case is to do something.
Be careful, you're talking yourself into a role here.
I know, I always do.
And it's not like this committee doesn't have a lot we've already bid off, is my other point. So we've got to be realistic about what we can do.
Yes.
Yeah, but I could see this more, Kathy, as like a revenue generating project for advisory.
Yeah.
So
all right, I changed my mind. You sold me. I've changed my mind.
So is this a good summary? I will send Mr. Healy a note with a copy to the board saying that we will come back after our next meeting with a summary of things that we think need to be delegated to someone. Kathy, I will copy you as chair of advisory so that you can figure out whether you want advisory looking at the same items or different items, et cetera. And then I think BOS, obviously, I think probably all the members have watched Mr. Butler's presentation to us at this point, would be my guess. But the question really becomes, are they ready to act on the 22nd and advisory on the 23rd, or do they want to digest and come back to the open items now that they have additional perspective? I mean, I'm happy to call a meeting before the 22nd and 23rd, but I'm also...
I think after you digest it would probably be best, probably the meeting afterwards, but...
Yeah,
okay.
So everyone's supportive of that, is that this group will come up a list of items. I guess what I would ask is, given we can't compile them all via email prior to a meeting, if everyone can kind of come up with your own list, bring it to the meeting, we'll just consolidate it and then formally vote on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Jason, can you send out maybe just a list of what you think are the action items first?
I can do that.
Each coming up with our own, and then we can kind of think who we think is responsible with some notes kind of thing.
I guess what I'll do is I'll draft kind of the memo that I'm planning to send post-meeting. That way we vote on a memo and you add items that I forget along the way.
Perfect.
Or delete. But I think the Board of Health one's the key one I want to get someone thinking about. Exactly. I actually had a memo drafted for this meeting and did not include it because I felt like I need to get direction from the committee of where we want to go. So anything else in transfer station? All right. Next item is item 7, discussion of public input received through initial feedback. So as you know, at a prior meeting, we decided to just get the pulse of the community and see if there are ideas that really hadn't popped onto our radar screen. There was about 27 responses. We do have individual IP addresses and names of people that submitted them. I didn't feel like I needed to put that out there for this, but these are verbatim responses, if you couldn't tell, in terms of how people replied to the feedback. Some people did comment, well, they thought it was a survey, not a feedback form, right? Because it was open-ended on purpose. But I guess my intent with doing this, and 27 is certainly not a representative sample in any way, shape, or form, but just was to kind of continue to see if there's, I guess, items that department heads haven't brought forward that we need to be considering, and or if there's items that just haven't popped on any of these 6 minds on the call that we need to be considering. And, you know, my takeaway from the feedback was, I think all of these are encompassed in some way, shape, or form. Some clearly just are not capital items, period. But I think we should continue to make people aware and the community aware of what we're doing, because it doesn't mean that something else won't pop up or another idea won't pop up. But I mean, there was a lot of discussion about sidewalks, obviously with that coming forward this year for the first time to town meeting in a very long time. You know, I think it was comfort and validation on some of the things we were doing as well, that people were generally interested in it. So I don't know if anyone had any other takeaways from any of this.
Yeah, I would say, Jason, like with to your point, like sidewalks is obviously a theme you've seen multiple times here where, I mean, there's the sidewalk kind of repair piece of the capital, but there was never a that sidewalk project kind of capital plan to fulfill that, whatever sidewalk project plan. Yes. And then the other one is like the rec center and the art center. There really isn't anything there unless you kind of wrote that into what's going on with Woodward.
Yeah.
So besides that.
Anyone else?
Should we dispose of these somehow? Is there a way to respond back?
It's a good question. I hadn't really come up with a formal plan. I mean, I could send an email to each of the people saying on behalf of the committee, thank you. I wasn't planning to do 27 formal responses unless someone wants to send 27 or you want to split the list in some way, shape, or form. Because I think some, right, are, hey, we're working on it, follow our meeting. Some are not really a capital item, not really within our purview sort of thing. Or some were just very specific to one residential street that really isn't like a broad plan.
Like mine.
Yeah. Jeff didn't submit that one, by the way. So I don't have a.
Just curious.
The only thing I would say, Jason, is maybe we think about this list a little more and maybe we get some more responses and put together a couple proposals, you know, just kind of finger in the air, not with costs, but, you know, okay, a rec center with a pool, we do all the sidewalks from the sidewalk plan and, you know, blah, 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 blah. We do a couple other things. And we put that into more of a survey and we can get more feedback. So that way, I don't know, just a thought.
We do an FAQ thing and post it on the website, town's website.
It's just, I will say, I heard a lot. I didn't a lot, but I had gotten a few phone calls from people too that they were confused. They thought they were taking a survey and there was like a blank line and they didn't know what to do. And it led to, I think, a huge level of confusion. I know it was shared all over Facebook, and that seemed to be the one theme that I kept hearing over and over again from people was it just has a space. It doesn't, you know, we don't get to check any boxes or, you know.
So, I mean, I guess, can someone come up? Clearly, that's what people wanted. So, like, do we do like a prioritization to make, I mean, again, I guess my concern with doing something like that would be demographic, right? Is, are you skewing it towards one demographic or another, depending on, right, who uses Facebook, who uses social media, who checks the town website, who checks the blog, or who doesn't participate in any of that, and they just show up at town meeting.
Yeah, maybe we take this list and we put together a survey with, you know, not necessarily voting, but select which one of these you'd be interested in, multiple selection. And we can even, you know, do printouts and bring them to the, you know, community centers or, I don't know, senior center can mail them out, I don't know, to some of the other areas. But basically check a box if you're interested in a pool, sidewalks on some of these streets, yada, 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 more downtown businesses, and then just kind of use it like that.
So also, I don't believe, did we utilize the email list in sending out the request through, say, recreation or through the senior center? I mean, there's huge email lists. If we could maybe draft something, a flyer or something, Jason, something very simple, telling people, hey, go and, you know, this is your chance. Here's your one sentence opportunity to tell us what you're looking for, you know, so they're going into it not expecting to specifically, you know, looking for a multiple choice. You're just telling them, you know, what's the two things you're looking for here? Go into the feedback form and fill this out. And I'd be curious to see if we got an increase from the 27, if we utilized all the different, you know, maybe even through the schools, or, because again, the schools play into this as well. So I just think we didn't, maybe we didn't utilize every opportunity that we had.
In my understanding, it was distributed to the listservs, but I'm not on any of them,
I
to be
didn't get
honest
it
with you.
I got it from none.
So,
So other than Robert did have a spot on the school bus, even though he's in college. So
Yeah, I mean, I do see Vanessa said we could also maybe do a tax bill insert, which might be it. Maybe a tax bill insert with a phone number with a voicemail. I don't know if we could set up a phone number.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be happy to work on something, just again, just a general flyer that, you know, and work on getting it to where I think we could get reach from. I'd be happy in between the meetings to do that. Okay. Happy to do it. Happy to do it.
Anyone have any other thoughts in addition? So Lisa, you'll bring that to the next meeting for us to kind of.
Yep. Before I do anything. You got it. Yep.
If I can digress at the moment to some of the topics that were in some of those comments, I felt that some of those could be addressed through capital partnerships, like through the pilot committee and through some other town corporate partnerships. I mean, certainly there are other entities with pools. There's certainly other entities that need sidewalks. And, you know, we always talk about grants, but, you know, there's some of these that we really should be looking at, maybe some of the smaller partners, nonprofits, but also maybe even some corporate corporate partners too. Sorry.
No, that makes perfect sense.
It does.
Any other items on that particular piece? All right, moving on to retaining owner's project manager. So the last bullet of our charge is to actually oversee capital projects at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen. So every town meeting where there's capital projects, Mark is supposed to make a recommendation to BOS, and then they're officially supposed to either ask us to oversee the projects or appoint a specific building committee. You won't have a building committee unless you're actually building it, do a large renovation, something like that. Knowing that we have capital items forthcoming at this town meeting, and knowing the benefits that you can get from an owner's project manager, what I wanted to do is get the appetite of this committee on whether we go out and retain an owner's project manager on like a retainer. As Kathy knows, that they bill at rates and hours. They don't bill it like a fixed fee like everyone else. So we're gonna have some really important discussions where we may need some external guidance here over the next couple of months, right? Especially where this school thing plays out. And instead of trying to rush a process to get someone that we know and we trust to be the town's like OPM for all projects, right? Because I think that's also where some of the other projects have fallen down in town, is maybe they didn't require by statute an owner's project manager, but if anyone had been actually overseeing them properly, they maybe would have been turning back money as opposed to overruns, et cetera. So we would have to do what we call a request for qualifications. So it's not who gives us the lowest rate per hour sort of thing, but it would be really setting up a path forward that this person or entities would be who represents us on projects that we ask them to represent, but also act as what I'll call a consultant to the committee. If we're going down a path that may have converging capital needs of what direction. The reason I'm bringing this forward now is really from my experience in public safety building. We didn't hire an owner's project manager until after town meeting had approved the project. And when I think about all the collaboration that had to happen to bring that forward, I candidly still don't know how we function without an owner's project manager to that phase, and didn't bring them in. So knowing that we'd have to interview people, it would take a couple of meetings. There's obviously not a rush to do this, but I guess I'm looking for some feedback based on that kind of preamble.
I would say, Jason, looking at this, you know, from what I do for a living, from a project perspective, I would take what projects do we have in the pipeline that we need a PM for, stagger it based upon those workloads, and I'd look and see, you know, can we sustain somebody for that period of time? And maybe that even becomes an FTE and a retainer. So, I mean, we have $60,000 here for OPM for the facade and the townhouse. So how long is the time horizon of that for that resource, how many hours, so on and so forth. And so, basically do the calculation of if this is approved, we would, shovel on the ground or even pre-approval, to your point, to get it through the process. We would want this person onboarded in, I don't know.
So my intent is to hire
next year or something, I guess.
I guess just to make sure we're saying the same thing, my intent was to hire a firm where you'd have different layers of people, right? You have like an executive that would really help you think through the planning phases. And then you'd have what I call a project manager that's really like that middle go-between. And then if we actually do a project, you have a clerk of the works. So when you said FTE, I started thinking someone on the town's payroll. Is that what you're inferring?
Well, I do both. So I have, multiple FTEs that work for me, and then I have a whole ton of FTCs, full-time consultants. And so if I have enough workload to, have somebody for full-time, obviously it's cheaper, even with benefits. And two, you retain that knowledge in-house versus always having a contractor. I mean, we don't need to get into adding a person. I'm just saying I usually like to know the analysis of, okay, if we would have to have, based upon the projects coming down the pipe, 3 people or 4 people, maybe one of them is a full-time. Usually you'd save your money and your consultant dollars on that way. But if we're just talking consultants, we can, I don't want to muddy the waters with talk of additional resources, but I always prefer turning a consultant into an employee if you can move it and keep the person busy, because you're going to save money and you're going to retain the knowledge.
You prefer to hire someone versus hiring a consultant, Andrew? You want some?
I have had consultants that's worked on projects with me for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and at whatever they get per hour per day, you could hire that person for a third of the cost. I'm just saying
but you're also locked in with that person, and if you don't have a full-time job for them, you probably.
But I'm saying I have enough. They're billing me at 40, 50 hours a week at a billable rate that's significantly higher than that person's salary and cost. So that's what I'm saying. I don't know if the OPMs are cheaper in the private sector versus what I pay.
No, it's a very specialized. So I'll give you the rates we paid in general in public safety building.
Yeah.
We're somewhere between $95 an hour and $150 an hour for the top level. We paid, so on a $20 million project, we paid $500,000 over a 3-year time period, right? So if you start to add up, and we had people full-time for the 14, 15 months of construction. And then we had people just coming to meetings and working in the background. But most of their time was probably in the car going between clients, calling us sort of thing. So I personally can't get behind anything from an employee perspective. Because even if we were to erect 3 town buildings, right, which we're not talking about, right, but I just don't see the benefit. And then I also think about, OPEB and pensions, right? So it's not just a cost today, it's a cost tomorrow too. And when we studied, that was one of my first questions on public safety was, why don't we just hire someone for 2 years, right? And who wouldn't want a town job with benefits? That's just not what towns do, regardless of how capital intensive they are. And I think we got 7 bids when we did that request for qualification, 7 that we actually like met the qualification, so to say. And they were very specialized. This is what they do. They do public construction administration. And Mark can attest to this better than anyone else. We churned through resources there too, because we felt like we were a good client and we could demand the top, talent. But I also think if anyone's on the outside looking in and they look at what our capital plan looks like for the next 10 years, right? When you're talking about multiple projects that are going to require oversight, they're not bidding for the couple hours to assist the committee. They're kind of bidding to be in the door for that larger project.
Yeah, and Jason, doing the math, it's about 100. If you assume $6 million of capital over the next 10 years at 2.5%, which is what your quote was, it's only 150,000 over 10 years. So I don't think you'd be able to find someone on an FTE that would be that little, right?
Yeah, and they have to have certain certifications too, like
right.
that in terms of construction supervision, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I can think of projects that we've recently undertaken or about to undertake that it would have been nice to maybe have that kind of person available. For example, the Finn boiler. To really weigh, the different information we were getting, so we really could come to a conclusion that we felt was the right conclusion. But I don't know.
Or maybe not an OPM like PM, but maybe some kind of person that's part of their duties is kind of a PMO that kind of oversees the project, like a central person within the organization, whether that be somebody in John Parent's world or something like that, that kind of oversees these OPMs on different projects. I don't know. But
I think Jeff was kind of getting to maybe what the practical problem is. It's not that much money, and as we saw with Vertex and the public safety building, they've got to keep going. So I don't know that we'd be able to get them to do what we wanted to do at the time we wanted to, because they'd be in the middle of some big projects. So I don't know how. But I'm still willing to consider it, because they probably would save us some money. It probably would be done better. I just don't know that. I don't know if the other towns do this.
They do, which is kind of where I'm getting the premise from. I don't know, Mark, if you were successful in pulling some of the other qualifications that are out there for retaining someone like this.
So I've got a couple of requests in, one to Lexington, one to Westboro. I haven't gotten anything back yet, but I will. I'll follow up with that tomorrow, Jason.
Okay, but I guess what you're confirming is they have a similar concept, like already in place.
Yeah, they do have a similar concept. I mean, I would not suggest adding an FTE. I don't see the value of that, especially when you take a look at pension and everything else in that. I don't see the return on the investment doing an FTE.
All right, so what's the will here of the committee? There's two paths. We can either put out a request for qualifications that's broad enough to have them advise us on, I think, Kathy, your example was pretty spot on, but also be available to other committees too, right? Is that person may be able to weigh in at BOS and advisory if there's a conflict of views of how to advance something, or we can just sit tight and wait till we get closer to having something approved and go about it that way.
Jason, can we do like an RFQ just to get people's rate cards, not necessarily just to put them on retainer, and then we can decide, based upon that.
Well, so RFQ is based on their qualifications, not based on their rates.
Okay.
And so I would say so we went, and when we did this for public safety, and Kathy was one of the ones that vetted with me, we had no idea what rates they were going to come back to us. But look, they're all public because they have to post their invoices. So the rates you're not going to be too different. It's a matter of how long you lock into those rates for. So one of the key, Kathy and John Rooney negotiated that contract for us. And one of the things they did was they locked in our rates for 3 years, right? So I'm sure the cost of labor for Vertex, who was our OPM, went up over that time, but the town paid the same rate throughout.
Yeah, it makes sense.
When we do projects, and for instance, when you did that project, did various companies submit bids to your project to be the OPM?
So we had to we put out what's called an RFQ, and they sent us why they're the most qualified to be our owner's project manager. There's no discussion of rates. There's no discussion of hours, no discussion of total budget. It was all about why they're the best to oversee that project. Then we evaluated those, did interviews and public meetings. Like, that's what I'm telling you about. It's like, if we do this, like you would have people in here pitching themselves to us, so to say, and then we would vote just based on their qualifications and then go from there.
So wouldn't there be also an impetus for these companies to give their expertise, at least on a advisory level, almost for free, to have their foot in the door?
I think they do it to a certain extent, but you're not going to come to a recorded Zoom meeting, provide professional advice on hopes of a contract when it's all public bid.
That's what I was wondering. Okay.
So Mark is going to come back with some info from Lexington and Westboro.
He's going to come back with what an RFQ looks like. But really, I can have Mark stop if the committee doesn't want to do an RFQ. But if we do want to do an RFQ, then we're basically signing ourselves up to do some interviews to have kind of someone to assist us along here. Because again, we do not still have an engineer or anyone really with construction background on this committee, which I think is going to be really important before long.
I think it's worth it to go through the exercise and then have a short list of people we're comfortable with. Now, in terms of like the public bidding process, like how does this save us time? I'm not quite sure how that works.
Because you've already selected your vendor. We'll select the vendors at the end of the process. We'll agree to a rate card with them, and then they're at our disposal, subject to the budget, as needed.
I just wasn't sure if we had to go back to multiple people because of how they set it up with the public whatever bid.
No, I mean, in let's face it, right? If you have to set up some sort of building committee for whatever we do with the schools or whatever, right? You already have someone theoretically there. We lost a month and a half trying to find an OPM.
Yeah, exactly.
Public safety.
I just didn't want to
do it right.
Go through this and then all of a sudden we do the exterior of the townhouse and have to start it all over again because each project, I don't know how it works. So.
Yeah, and that person's also available to assist on maybe some of these smaller projects like that REC does or something else that don't require anything. So
I think it's worth the exercise.
Is there anything that objects to the exercise? All right, Mark, we'll keep working through that. Real quick final items, FY22 capital approval process. So my intent is to, I'll kind of combine this with meeting schedule. So my intent is to do a meeting 2 weeks from today. I want to focus on, Lisa's going to do presentation on the parcels in town. You have all asked in various formats for a more comprehensive listing of the vehicles. I want to take a deep dive on the vehicles in town. Chief Paulus and Karen have provided a lot of detail. I need to get the rest of the fleet. I think we have Chief Achilles as well, but really where we want to go with vehicles so that we don't have to spin our wheels, right? That comes back to Andrew, some of the items you've brought up in the past. So I want to have a meeting on those two topics and obviously cover off kind of the open items from this meeting. And then in early October, what I want to do is formally vote on the items for FY22. But what I need to know is who you want to hear from. So I think Karen needs to come and talk about the Corderville Road project. Brief synopsis of at least the conversation I've had with her is it's like ready to go, so to say, especially once Board of Selectmen adopts complete streets and they'd have to do an engineering phase. But at the same time, she's really worried about getting public feedback in the Zoom setting that we're in. So I think that's what she's trying to balance. But I think we need to start the ball rolling there of, that's a significant chunk of our capital budget for next year. It's a bonded project, but still. And I think it then leads into how you would answer your questions about road maintenance and whether you would do road maintenance and Corderville Road in the same year, or would you take a year off from your road maintenance budget because they're not going to have bandwidth to do any other projects. So I definitely have Karen slotted. What I need to know, and you don't have to decide tonight, just send me an email and say, I want Chief Achilles there because I have questions on fire items, or I want Chief Paulus there because I have questions on police. That way, if you feel like you have an objection to anything that's in there, the department head can defend it, and then we can take our path forward to then what I would think is we would make a joint presentation to BOS and advisory of here are all the items, here's why that now is the time, and hopefully they could either vote at that time or at their next meeting on it, or have the department heads there if there's objections to any of the items. That way, again, we solidify this and we kind of move forward with some of the bigger topics we talked tonight. That makes sense? So I guess looking at a calendar, I'm planning 28th morning because we've done 2 in a row at night. And then if we went 2 weeks out, that would be Columbus Day. So maybe I'll go to the 19th.
Jason, before the 28th, can we Would anybody opposed to doing the 29th instead of
Yeah, that's
Monday?
Yom Kippur.
I cannot do the 29th, but we absolutely will not do the 28th. So
I can do the evening that night. That's not a big deal.
well, how about we just go to the 5th? So we do October 5th, and then we do October 19th. So October 5th will be land and vehicles in the following items from this meeting. And then October 19th would be take a position on FY22 capital. That way, obviously, if you have questions for department heads beforehand on specific items, feel free to talk to them. There's nothing that precludes you from going and having a conversation with anyone. But if you really want them, you think the committee can benefit from anyone other than Karen, I'd like to know sooner rather than later so that I can get them teed up.
I mean, when we did the 21 ones, didn't we have pretty much everybody come in?
We did. I'm also cognizant that some of them are kind of, we already know where we're at. So I'm happy to have everyone come in.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really talking facilities, police, fire, DPW. I think recreation and schools are going to fall off of this.
Because it's just 22
stuff,
right, on the list.
Sorry, what'd you say, Andrew?
It's just the stuff that's on 22, right?
Yeah.
Jason, so the 5th is in the 7:30 in the morning?
Unless anyone raises an objection to that. That okay?
Sounds like that's a good schedule, I think.
Okay. That'll give us 3 weeks before the next one. And then
is Brian going to reach out to these department heads and just say, hey, you need to get everything in. If you need to add anything by a deadline, just to make sure nothing comes in after the fact.
Yeah, I think Mark, Brian, we should figure out a communication. I feel like I've talked to everyone and said, here's what's on the list, but I think I don't know when your next department head meeting is, if you want to do last call, and obviously we'll have ClearGov by then too. So there is a formal request process through there that they'll have to go through in future years. So maybe we can use that as the trial period.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. Other business that may properly come before the committee. I have one request from Brian, and this is really just administrative in nature. We obviously we approved proposals at our last meeting. At some point, there will be invoices related to those approvals. There are different views that different committees take in terms of the chair approves them and reports back if the committee's already approved the expense, the chair with the town administrator, or we could just approve them at every meeting. But obviously, when you're not meeting for every 2 to 3 weeks, especially we deal with individuals or small businesses, you don't necessarily like to tie up money that long. So I'm not in favor of that, but he asked for just a formal vote of the committee of how we want to handle invoices, just so that we have a procedure moving forward.
I make a motion that we allow the chair to approve expenditures as they come forward to the finance manager.
Second.
Second. So I'm going to ask for a slight modification. I would say the chair and town administrator. I'm a big believer of two. So if you're amenable to that amendment.
And just as a item for clarification, you can't approve anything that is over the amount we approved, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah,
we issued $19.6 million of payments on the public safety building. We were very careful there, and I have no intention of, we're talking a lot smaller numbers here.
No, I just wasn't sure.
Really well. Worked really well with dollar thresholds. I would never do anything that's above the committee's approval. We'll come back and get a change order.
Yeah. No, I meant more along the lines of like Brian can't ask for approval for, a $5,000 invoice if the approval was $4,000.
Correct. So for example, ClearGov was $23.75. So if he tries to get me approved $2,500, only $23.75 can be paid.
Okay, makes sense.
All right. So I guess we have an amended motion on the floor. Whoever's doing the minutes who seconded it? Andrew,
I'll second
I
it.
did. Okay.
All right, Jeff seconded it. Lisa made the motion. Any further discussion? All right, roll call. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
and Pfaff.
Aye.
All right, any other business? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Roll call. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Pfaff,
Aye.
Malinowski, aye. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Aye.